Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, videocopilot.net, and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. And if you know me, you know I don't say that for just any tutorial. In fact, I never say that. And that's what makes this tutorial specifically exciting, like I said. So you're going to have to believe me on that. What we're going to be creating is a cool design based on the TNT Network graphics by Troika Design Group. And they did an awesome job. I was completely blown away. And, there's some cool techniques in here that I want to share. And, it's nice to create a cool design while we're at it. So here's what we're going to be creating. Okay, so we have a lot of things going on. We've got a lens flare. We've got particles. We got streaming particles. And we've got this silver ring. And this is actually created right inside After Effects, no 3D program. So that's going to be a lot of fun creating that. First, let's create a new composition. We'll choose DV widescreen square pixel, and we'll do 24 frames per second and maybe 10 seconds long. And I got to tell you, I'm excited. It's been a week or so. I was kind of sick, feeling a lot better now. So I wasn't like talking to a lot of people for a while. It was lonely at times, frankly. What I did was I took my socks off and I made sock puppets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. You just kind of put your hand in the sock and, you make friends that way. Anyway, we had a lot of fun. I mean, bottom line is when you're left alone for a long time, you really have to keep yourself occupied. Otherwise, you could literally go crazy. We'd have conversations, we'd perform plays and just, little things, duets. Anyway, I'm glad to be back in the office talking to myself instead of at home talking to sock puppets. It's actually not that different now that I think about it. All right, first things first, let's create a new solid. And we'll just make it black, call it background, BG. And we'll choose Effect, Generate, 4-Color Gradient. Now, I don't use this one very often, but, it works pretty cool. Just, pick 4 colors. And it's just kind of cool to use colors that aren't all exactly the same, and it just kind of creates an interesting contrast. And you can move them around, and they kind of blend in different ways. So kind of a cool abstract background, quick enough. Now we are going to be using a free Video Copilot preset. So head on over to videocopilot.net, click on Tutorials, and click on Presets. And there's a preset called the 3D Orbit tool. And go ahead, click on that, download the project file, and install all the presets, and it's going to show up, and we're going to be using that one. Now, if you're not sure how to install the presets, check out the SureTarget Energetic Titles tutorial. Walks you through that. Oh, by the way, the music and sound effects you heard for that demonstration from Designer Sound Effects and our Cinematic Music Design Tools Pro scores. So check those out and create some very cool music tracks. So on to it. Now, the first thing we want to create is our silver ring. So let's create a new solid. And we want it to be a square. So we'll take the height and we'll do 486 by 486. So that it's just a square. And then choose OK. And then we have the elliptical mask tool. So just click on that if it's not showing, ellipse tool, and double click on it. So now we've created a perfect circle. Very good. Now what I want to do is duplicate that mask. And to do that, we choose Edit, Duplicate, or Control D. By the way, if you find these tutorials to be a little too ahead of your current skill set, no worries. When you're over at the website, check out the After Effects basic training. It's got a full series, free, learn After Effects, and impress your friends. And the women. Do not forget. That's how I found my wife. Not true. But I did meet a lot of crazy people doing After Effects. Okay, so we've created the circle, And let's go ahead and change the solid color to like gray. Now, I don't want to get into too many details, but the way the masks work is they have these different operations like add, subtract, invert, stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is take the second mask and subtract it. And so now everything's gone. But if I hit MM with the layer selected, you can see I bring up all the mask properties, very fancy. And then I can change the expansion of the second mask inward. So if I click and drag to the left, you can see now we've got an actual ring that is viable. So let's just bring that in a bit. And before we move on, let's go ahead and pre-compose our circle. So layer, pre-compose, move all attributes into the new comp and choose OK. Now I want to open that comp up. So Alt double click, or just double click if you're on After Effects CS4. And what I want to do is change the comp settings so that it's a little bit larger. So I'll choose comp settings, and we'll do unlock and set 864 by 864 and choose OK. And that way we just have a little bit more room while we work. Okay, so the next step is to basically duplicate the circle layer. So Control D, and we'll go ahead and change the color of this to be, like white. So we'll fill it with a white color. Now we want to change the mask properties again. So hit MM. Now for the first mask, we're going to bring the expansion in. And so this is going to be the inner part of the shape. And at any time we can go back to the other shapes and make adjustments, MM, and maybe make the ring a little bit bigger, anything like that. So bottom line is this is kind of going to be a lot of trial and error, and that's just the way it works. Okay, for the second layer, what I'm going to do is take mask number 1 and increase the feather amount. So you can see it sort of feathers out. And I may bring the expansion in about there. And I may play with the expansion here. So just you're going to be playing around with the settings to create what you want to create. And that looks pretty good. So feather that out, bring it in a bit. And this is going to create just some of the specular highlights on this shape. Now I'm just going to add a 1 pixel feather on that shape so it's not a harsh line there. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this circle layer. So now we've got 3. So we'll call this specular, and we'll call this thin specular. So for the third layer here, we're going to go into the masks, and let's make a very thin line. So I'm going to lower the opacity on this number 2 layer to say 50% for now. And then on this layer, we'll shut that off for just a second. We turn it on, and we'll hit MM. And we'll bring the feathering down, and we'll bring the size of the mask down. So this time it's just a very thin edge. The other fun thing now is we can take, say, the second mask, turning on the masks here, and we can make some adjustments to it. So if we click on it, and let's lock the top mask, and then we'll select this mask, and then just click one of the points, and click it in with the arrow keys, the left and right arrow keys. So move it over a little bit to the left. And what we've done is thinned it out so it disappears, but up here we can still see it. So just kind of a nice way to give the shape a little bit more life. Now for the specular layer, let's bring the opacity of it up just a little bit. Now another thing I want to do here is maybe take one of the masks of this one, hit M, lock this one, and then click away, select the layer, and then click the top point, and with the arrow keys move it up. And what we're doing is making that specular part on the top here very large, and in contrast we might take the side ones and move it in. Depending on what we want it to look like. And so now you can see we've created sort of a realistic looking shading effect. And it doesn't stop there. Let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the bottom layer and move it to the top. And we're going to create a shading around the outer edge. So we'll choose Generate Fill. And we'll use just a dark gray color. And we'll hit MM. And we'll bring the mask expansion up. Now we'll go ahead and bring the gray color down just a little bit so it's not too dark. And what I'm going to do is now create kind of a specular highlight for the edge. So we'll take the thin specular, Control D, duplicate that, we'll move it up here to the top, and turn the mask back on. And we'll solo it here just for a second. And what I actually want to do is turn on the continuous rasterization, and then hit S, and we're going to scale it up to move it out. And the reason we do it with the scale is because that way we don't have to change the size of the layer, and it just gets a little messy if we do it that way. This is just an easier way to do it. But when I scale it up, I move the specular from being there to being up here at the top. And then I can make some adjustments to it, at this point. Now, I want this to be a very thin specular point, so I'm going to bring this shape in as well as this shape. And so what that does is leaves a very small shape here at the top. Okay, so that's pretty much what we're going for. Now, if you want to make it a little bit more fancy, check out the comp I did called Test Shape. And I just used a few more layers and a little bit of color, but ultimately I basically used the exact same setup. And I also added a little bit of rotation on some of those. And the way I did that, for example, is taking, say, the specular layer here and hitting R, and alt-click on the rotation and type time times 80, and that way it just kind of rotates around. Now we can also duplicate that and then hit U and just reverse that, say do -150, and that way it does something just a little bit different. We can lower the opacity here, and pretty much all the layers on top we can maybe set to screen. And it just kind of creates a slightly different look. Maybe not this layer, we'll keep that normal, the darker layer, so it keeps our dark edge there. We can go back into our comp 2 where we've created the scene, and we'll go ahead and scale down our ring about that size. Now before we go on, I'm going to go ahead and switch out my shape with the one we just created because I worked on it for a little bit longer. So I'll hold down Alt and replace it by dropping it right on top of it in the comp. And then also we're going to create a new solid to create the reflectivity on the surface. So comp size, okay, we're going to choose Effect, Noise, Fractal Noise, looking good. And we're going to animate the evolution by alt-clicking on the stopwatch and typing time times 300. And that way it just kind of phases. And then we'll add a blur, Effect, Blur, Fast Blur. Turn on Repeat Edge Pixels and blur it out. And then we'll choose Effect, Blur, Vector Blur. And we'll turn that up a bit. And so it kind of creates almost a watery-like surface. And here we can play around with the brightness and the contrast to give it a little bit more, a harsh look, and maybe turn the scale down on the fractal noise so it's smaller. Something like that. And then we'll use another effect called Channel Set Matte. And then we can choose the test shape, or the ring that we created. Uncheck Stretch Matte. And that way it creates a perfect shape. And then we can size it down so that it covers the ring. And let's change the transfer mode. So hit F4 if it's not up. And we're going to change it to soft light. So overlay, soft light. And so it gives it a very nice, very fluid looking reflectivity. And I'll just preview a second of that. We can take a look. Very nice. It's a bit slow to render, so we'll just shut it off while we work, and we'll turn it back on a little bit later. Okay, the next thing we need to do is create a null object. So, layer, new, null object, and we'll go ahead and make it three-dimensional. Just do it right now, probably a good time. And then we'll come over to the effects and presets, and we're going to type orbit. And remember, this 3D orbit preset can be downloaded from the website, and we're going to take it and we're going to drop it onto the 3D null object. Now, what it's going to do is rotate in a circle. Now, we can't quite see it because we're right at an angle with it, but if I look at a custom view, you can see it's basically making a circle. So what we're actually going to do though is make a slight change to the expression. So hit U, go into the expression and go down to the very bottom, scroll down, and we're going to change this last line. We're going to change it from 0, Z to Z, 0. And what that's basically going to do is make it so now it rotates in a circle facing the camera. So if we bring the radius down, you can see now we have a perfect circle at the camera. So just a slight change, and it's going to work exactly the way we need it to. So just change the radius until it lines up with your circle, and then just make sure that it follows your circle. You may want to check to ensure that your circle is right in the center, and it looks pretty close. The next thing we want to do is set up our particle system. Now, I am going to be using a third-party particle system, Trapcode Particular, but I'll go ahead and show you a quick way to do it with the standard particle system. It just won't have all the features. Now, you can get that from trapcode.com, and no, I don't get a commission for letting you know about that. I really believe that Trapcode Particular is an essential tool for After Effects. So, moving on, we're going to create a new solid, and we'll go ahead and make it red, whatever. And we'll call this Particle World and choose OK. And then we're going to choose Effect, Simulation, Particle World. Now, Particle World is a great plugin. It just has some weird limitations. And the first thing is if we go into the producer, the position X, Y, Z are just these obscure values. So we have to use an expression to get it to link to an actual position of a 3D layer in After Effects. So what I'm going to do is go into the Particle World settings, and I'm going to Alt-click on the position X. And that brings up our expressions. And what we're going to type is X equals, and then we're going to take the pick whip, come down, click on the X value for the position of the null object. So X, Y, Z. We're going to click X, and then we're going to type minus this comp, capital C, dot width divided by 2. And then we type X divided by this comp dot width. Now I'm going to reuse the expression. So I'm going to copy it, right click, copy, alt click on position Y, paste it, and make a slight change. We're going to change it from 0 to 1, and we're going to change width to height. And that way, everything works according to the Y position. Now we're also going to alt-click on the position Z, right-click, paste, and we need to mostly delete everything after the 0, change the 0 to 2. So remember, 0, 1, 2, X, Y, Z. And X divided by this comp.width is correct. We'll click away, and now our particle system is going to follow that null object. So we'll go ahead and shut off all the viewing tools of Particle World, and we'll close the layer down, and we'll just make a few adjustments. First, on our null object, we're going to change the speed to -300, and we'll probably move over here. Let's see. Perfect. Now, in Particle World, let's go down to the particle and physics. We'll turn the velocity down so that it doesn't shoot out. Particle type, change to a shaded sphere or a faded sphere, okay? And we'll make it like a light blue and darker blue there. Probably going to turn the size down pretty low, and we'll change the mode F4 to add. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Now for our physics, let's turn the gravity down to 0, and we might even turn it upside down, so -0.05, so the particles kind of float upwards after they are done, and that looks pretty cool. We'll set the longevity to 2 seconds, and that way they kind of float away at the end. Now one thing we want to do is go into the options and change the particle opacity map, and we probably want to like set it to come in like that but slightly fade it in. So it fades in quickly and then it fades out long over life. Okay and okay. And so that way it's on mostly right there. And for the size, we want it to be smaller and larger when they're born. So something like that. And we also want to shut the particles off after a certain point. So right about here, we'll set a keyframe for the birth rate. We'll move forward a little bit and turn it down to 0. And that way they stop emitting after that point. Now the gravity looks a bit high. Let's turn that down to 0.02. Now the velocity might be something to play with, as well as the resistance, depending on the look you're going for. So as I said, I just want to show you a way to actually get a similar result. Okay, so you can get some pretty good results with Particle World, but there are some limitations, and for that we are going to be using Trapcode Particular. So let's create a new solid, and we'll choose Effect Trapcode Particular. And let's go ahead down to the emitter and let's link the emitter to the null object. So the way to do that is a little bit easier. So we alt click on the position XY and then we pick whip down to the position of the null object. And we can just click on position and that brings over both the X and Y value. Then we alt click on position Z and we pick whip down to the Z position for the null object. And that's all we have to do, and it's already linked up, and that looks pretty good. I mean, I don't even think we need to do any more work, but we will anyway. So in the particle settings, let's go and set it to a blue color. We'll change the transfer mode of the layer to add, and size over life. I'm just doing these randomly. We want them to be large and sort of fade out over time. Make the size like 2. And turn up the size random. Now the life can be about 2.5 seconds. Going up here, we'll turn the velocity down very low, and you can see the velocity from motion sort of throws the particles off, and that's kind of cool. So we'll spread it out just a little bit here. And we want to increase the particles per second. And you can see it's looking pretty cool. Let's go ahead down here. We'll set the transfer mode to add, and we'll go into the physics, air, turbulent field, and we'll make some changes to the position. So when we change that, you can see here it kind of starts looking almost smoky, and that's a very cool effect. And we'll turn down the speed to about 10 so that it's not moving too much. And we might want to turn down some of these other physics properties like the velocity from motion to maybe 5, so it's not just flying around. So that looks good. How about some more particles? The more the merrier. That's what I say sometimes. Now coming back down, we want to go ahead and turn some wind on. So we'll make the wind kind of go up and to the right. But you can play around with that to get it to look the way you want. So this looks pretty good. Now I want to make another particle system that's almost identical. So I'm going to hit Control D and duplicate the particle. And then we want to make just a few changes. For example, we're going to make the velocity from motion a little higher. And we're also going to turn up the effect position and maybe the velocity as well, so that these particles are basically flying around a little bit more than our initial system, and they're also going to be smaller, so maybe 1.5. And to contrast the two, let's go ahead and turn the velocity down of the first one to like 10, so that one is pretty tight and the other one is a little bit more sporadic. So now another thing we want to do is create some thin lines. So we're going to duplicate the particle system one more time, and we'll call this line. And we'll solo it. And what I'm going to do here is turn the velocity down, velocity from motion, just a little bit, and then come down to the turbulent field here, turn down the position a bit, and maybe make the size of the particles even smaller, and perhaps turn up the particle rate so it's a very nice line, and turn the opacity down. Now I'm also going to turn the life down to It'd be 1.5 seconds so that it's a little bit shorter stream. And that looks pretty cool. Then I'll go ahead and duplicate the line, and we want to kind of offset it a little bit. So the way we can do that is play around with the scale and then duplicate one more time, and again play around with the scale of the turbulent field, and that just offsets it so it's a little different looking. So there we have that. We turn everything on, and it looks like this elaborate animation. So let's go ahead and start playing around with the color and actual look of the design. So first, our background color is a little blue and it's a little light. So let's add a tint and a color correction. And we'll turn the tint amount down a little bit. And for the color correction, and we'll contrast it a bit. We'll go to the red channel, bring it down, and the blue channel also bring it down a bit. So kind of a green colored background. And we probably want to add a nice glow to these different instances of particulars. So effect, stylize, glow. We'll just play around with the settings here. Copy that. I'm just pasting the glow amount to all of these particles, and that way they, look pretty good. You obviously want to play around with the settings to get it exactly right. Now, the other thing I want to do is animate the particles per second, but I want to make sure to do it in a way that I can control. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, shut it off, and choose Effect, Expression Control, Slider Control, and we'll call this, hit Return, and just type particle per second. And what we're going to do is we're going to animate it from 1 keyframe, hit U, and move forward a little bit, down to 0. And what that's going to do basically, and we want to do it at about this point. So when the null object gets around past the top of the circle, we'll move it to about right there. So then I'm going to go into the particle system, alt-click on the particle per second, and we're going to type value star multiply times this particle per second slider. And what that does is maintains the current value of particles and then multiplies times 1. But then it animates to 0, which essentially stops the particles from being born. And that way I can just move this value over and stop the birth of the particles. And we can do this for all of the other layers. And what I'll do is I'll select the particles here, choose Edit, Copy Expression Only. Then I can take all the other layers here and choose Edit, Paste. And so now that expression has been applied to all the other layers, and they all stop emitting right when they get to the top here. So that's just kind of a cool trick there. Now there's one little detail in the original video, and that is the particles don't start until after the thin particles. So we can't just offset them in time, because if we do that, they're just going to be shorter, but they'll still start at the same point. We need to actually sample the time of the null object at a different point than the other layers. So what we need to do is go into the expression. So select the layer, choose U. Here we have the position XY and the position Z. So this position is coming from that null object, this square right here. So we want to change it. So right now it's saying position, and we're going to add dot value capital at capital time parentheses, and we're going to type time minus 0.05, for example. And let's see what that does. And we'll go ahead and solo that, and we'll turn on the null object also. So you can see we've kind of let it a little bit. And if we change the number here, say to 8, it'll be even further away. We could do 12, and it'll again be further away. So it's a pretty simple expression, and we'll go ahead and copy it and paste it to the other values. Now in this case where we're using this number here, we can go ahead and put it right before it. So position dot value at time. Now we do want to copy this and paste it to the other layer, and to do that we'll select the two parameters, edit, copy expression, select particular, and edit, paste. So now we turn everything on, what's going to happen is our thin particles are going to come flying around. Actually, we'll just shut these two off for just a second and maybe just move the position of these so they're a little bit more random looking. So now we want to animate our ring. So we'll choose Effect, Transition, and we'll try the Radial Wipe. So if we animate the transition completion, you can see we've already created, the kind of animation that we want. Turn the feathering up, and then just, turn on the stopwatch, hit U, and we'll move it over to the beginning, and at the end, we want it fully animated on. And we might just offset it a little bit so it's a little late. The other thing we want to do is add a cool lens flare. So we'll choose New Solid, and we'll make it black, OK, flare, OK, and we'll choose Effect, Generate Lens Flare. Easy enough. We'll tint it, and then add a color correction curves, and that way we can kind of colorize it for a nice bright blue flare. Now the cool thing is we can alt-click on the flare center and link it to the position of the null. So we'll do that. We'll alt-click on the flare center and then pick whip down to the null position. And even though that layer's 3D, it hasn't been changed on the Z-axis, so it'll actually line up perfectly. So we'll change the transfer mode to Add, and here we've got our cool lens flare. Although we may want to make some adjustments, so let's do that. First, I'm going to crush the lens flare. I don't like all of those extra pieces. And the other problem here is that the lens flare is just too fast. If that's what you want it to look like, that's fine. But I actually want the lens flare to go half the speed of the animation. And I actually did that in the original design. So we're going to do a quick expression and change that up. So we have the position, and it's exactly the right position. But we're going to type dot value at time multiply 0.5. So what that does is makes it so it's half the speed. So now it's just a little bit slower, which is what we want. So let's go ahead and animate the flare brightness from 0. And then when it gets to about the bottom left corner, we'll turn it up really bright. And then past it, we'll turn it down to 0. And we may let it get a little higher, so maybe up there. And the other thing we can do, if we want to offset where this is, because actually I want it to be a little bit quicker here. So what I can do is do 0.5 times 0.5 plus 0.2. So there's, you have a lot of control with simple expressions like this. So maybe 0.15. And you can, play around and get it to look the way that you want. Now, the other thing I want to do is add a, anamorphic stripe to our lens flare. So to do that, we're going to create a new blue solid, somewhere in that range. And we're going to create a circle mask, and we want to do it right there in the center. And we need to do a couple of things. So we can stretch out the side here. And then feather the mask a bit, and then change it to add. And that gets you most of the shape that you want, but we want it to be a little thinner, so we'll thin it out, turn the feathering down, maybe lower the opacity of the layer. And then we want to duplicate it. And the second copy is going to be blurred out a little bit more. So the first one is supposed to be a little bit sharper. Not as much feathering, and the top one will be, a little softer. So go ahead and play with that until you get it the way you want. And once you do, then we're going to link the position to the flare. So if we bring up the flare position, we can alt-click on the position, link it to the flare center, alt-click on the position, link it to the flare center, and so now you have, this anamorphic flare. The only problem is it's not fading out. So we're also going to add a quick expression to the opacity. So to do that, we're going to alt-click on the opacity, and we're going to link it to the flare brightness so that these two values link together. And that should actually do it. Alt-click, link to the flare brightness. And there we go. So our anamorphic flare is a bit bright, so we'll do a fill color, and we'll fill it with a darker blue. And we'll take the other one and we'll also fill it with a darker blue. So play around with that until you get it to look the way you want. You can even, scale the layer down as one possibility. And adjusting the anchor point will allow you to move it around, to get it exactly where you want it to be. And then you can probably add some text into the background and just fade it in as everything gets blown out. And, should be able to transition very nicely. So we'll go ahead and turn on our reflection layer. Make sure that we line it up, because I think we may have moved it around. So let's just make sure that these two layers are lined up. Looks good. Now we probably want to fade it on also, so that it fades on closer to being completely animated. So just a quick little fade on, and that way we don't see it. Okay, so it looks pretty good, and with a few adjustments, I'm sure you guys can make it look even better. Play around with the physics in the particle settings, and play around with the glow amount, and even the color of the particles will change the way that it blends. So if we went for like a whiter colored particle, it would actually glow more and would look a little bit more interesting during its initial pass. So play around with that, and check out the sample video. Anyway, I hope you guys had fun with this project. Be sure to check out the forum if you have any questions, the blog, and of course check out our great products. We've got some cool tools and all sorts of things that would go very nicely with a design like this, like Riot Gear, some of the ink elements. So check those out. Very cool way to support the site. And I hope you guys had fun. And finally, if you're really looking to jazz it up, just go down to the shape at the bottom, Control D, duplicate it, and then you have 2, okay? And, one looks pretty cool, but look at that. When you add 2, it just changes the whole dynamic, and, you start winning awards for your graphic work. So just keep that in mind.